Aaron's house. They called him up and tried to sucker him into meeting them without his lawyer. The FBI sat 2 armed agents down in an interrogation room with me to get to the bottom of this alleged conspiracy. But we weren't criminals. We were only citizens. We did nothing wrong. They found nothing wrong. We did our duty as citizens, and the government investigation had nothing to show for it but a waste of a whole lot of time and money. If you want a chilling effect, sit somebody down with a couple FBI agents for a while and see how quickly their blood runs cold. There are people who face danger every day to protect us. Police officers and firefighters and emergency workers. And I am grateful and amazed by what they do. But the work that people like Aaron and I did, slinging DVDs and running shell scripts on public materials, should not be a dangerous profession. We weren't criminals. But there were crimes committed. Crimes against the very idea of justice. When the U.S. attorney told Aaron he had to plead guilty to 13 felonies for attempting to propagate knowledge before she'd even consider a deal, that was an abuse of power, a misuse of the criminal justice system. That was a crime against justice. And that U.S. attorney does not act alone. She is part of a posse intent on protecting property, not people, all over the United States. Those without access to means don't have access to justice and face these abuses of power every day. It was a crime against learning when a non-profit corporation like JSTOR, charged with advancing knowledge, turned a download that caused no harm and no damage into a $92 million federal case. And the JSTOR corporate monopoly on knowledge is not alone. All over the United States, corporations have staked their fences on the field of education. For-profit colleges that steal from our veterans, non-profit standard bodies that ration public safety codes while paying million-dollar salaries, multinational conglomerates that measure the work of scientific papers and legal materials by their gross margins. In the JSTOR case, was the overly aggressive posture of the Department of Justice, prosecutors, and law enforcement officials revenge because they were embarrassed that, in their view at least, we somehow got away with something in the Pacer incident? Was the merciless JSTOR prosecution the revenge of embarrassed bureaucrats because they looked stupid in the New York Times, because the United States Senate called them on the carpet? We will probably never know the answer to that question, but it sure looks like they destroyed a young man's life in a petty abuse of power. This was not a criminal matter. Aaron was not a criminal. If you think you own something, and I think that thing is public, I'm more than happy to meet you in a court of law. And if you're right, I'll take my lumps if I've wronged you. But when we turn armed agents of the law on citizens trying to increase access to knowledge, we've broken the rule of law. We've desecrated the temple of justice. Aaron Swartz was not a criminal. Aaron Swartz was a citizen, and he was a brave soldier in a war which continues today. A war in which corrupt and venal profiteers try to steal and hoard and starve our public domain for their own private gain. When people try to restrict access to the law, or they try to collect tolls on the road to knowledge, or deny education to those without means, those people are the ones who should face the stern gaze of an outraged public prosecutor. What the Department of Justice put Aaron through for trying to make our world better is the same thing they can put you through. Our army isn't one lone wolf. It is thousands of citizens, many of you in this room, who are fighting for justice and knowledge. I say we are an army, and I use the word with cause because we face people who want to imprison us for downloading a database to take a closer look. We face people who believe they can tell us what we can read and what we can say. our army, I see an army that creates instead of destroys. I see the army of Mahatma Gandhi walking peacefully to the sea to make salt for the people. I see the army of Martin Luther King walking peacefully but with determination to Washington to demand their rights, because change does not roll in on the wheels of inevitability. It comes through continuous struggle. When I see our army, I see an army that creates new opportunities for the poor. An army that makes our society more just and more fair. An army that makes knowledge universal. When I see our army, I see the people who have created the Wikipedia and the Internet Archive, the people who coded GNU and Apache and Bind and Linux. I see the people who made the EFF and the Creative Commons. I see the people who created our internet as a gift to the world. When I see our army, I see Aaron Swartz, and my heart is broken. We've truly lost one of our better angels. I wish we could change the past, but we cannot. But we can change the future, and we must. We must do so for Aaron. We must do so for ourselves. We must do so to make our world a better place, a more humane place, a place where justice works and access to knowledge becomes a human right. Thank you.
This episode of This American Life is brought to you by Squarespace, an easy way to create a professional website, blog, or portfolio. With modern templates and simple drag-and-drop tools, you can create a website in minutes. For a free trial, Visit squarespace.com/American. Reggie Richardson and his identical twin brother Ronnie went to grade school and high school together. They were roommates in college and track stars together. They trained as educators together, taught fourth grade classes side by side, were assistant principals together, and finally, this fall, achieved something that they had dreamed of together since they were teenagers. They became co-principals of the school, Claremont Middle School in Oakland, California. And what's that like? Well, one recent morning I was talking to Reggie in his office when Miss Champion, the administrative assistant, called on the walkie-talkie.
This is Mr. Richardson.
I have Orion's mom on the phone. She said this is urgent.
Is she on the line now?
Yes.
Do you want to transfer me?
Okay, which Mr. Richardson is it?
Reggie Richardson.
Okay, thanks.
Copy that.
Turns out to be an incredibly handy thing having your identical twin as your co-principal. They handle things the same. They know how each other thinks. They look the same. When kids arrive in the morning or leave in the afternoon, they both wander around the grounds. And there's this feeling of omnipresence. Here's Reggie's brother, Ronnie.
What's powerful about what having two of us is that even the teachers and the students are like, well, I don't know, he's everywhere. I turn this corner, he's there. I turn this corner, he's there.
When I first came, I didn't know they were twins. And I needed help running my classes. So I seen one by the stairs, and then I walked down the hallway and I seen another one. Like they were at two places at the same time, and I thought it was one person. And I was like, what?
To afford two principals, the school has no assistant principal. And mostly the two brothers just pass things off. Perfect surrogates for each other. Ever wish you had a second you to help you with your kids or your job at work? That is every day for these guys. Something comes up for Ronnie and he can't meet with a parent, just tells Reggie to do it. When I was there, a group of parents and kids who had been coming to Claremont next year was getting a tour. Ronnie was the one who was supposed to lead it, which he did at first.
Good morning, beautiful scholars.
His brother Reggie stopped at the library where the tour was starting, said a few words. The plan was that his participation was going to be brief. But then, when the bell rang, Ronnie, the one who's supposed to be leading the tour, stepped into the hallway, monitored the change of classes, which these guys do all day long.
James, can you please take your beanie off, son? Thank you.
And he stayed out there, back in the library, stuck with the tour group now. His brother Reggie, bam.
However, in the interim, Mr. Richardson stepped out. You know, we get real busy, so he should be back. But I'm going to split you in groups. If we have to do a large group, we will do so. But he should be back momentarily.
When Ronnie returned, the two continued the tour together for a while, and then Reggie ditched out, leaving Ronnie. This swapping tasks back and forth happens all day long between them. And since they arrived at Claremont at the beginning of this school year, everybody, kids, parents, teachers, all say they have made a huge difference. Claremont went through several principals last year, and it was chaotic. Kids were roaming the halls when they were supposed to be in class. It was such a mess, teachers say, that it drove the kids' standardized test scores down. Now, it's orderly, thanks to the Richardsons. And among the students who they've taken a special interest in are a pair of twins from the 7th grade, Faith and Hope, who've been to the principal's office many, many times since Hope transferred into the school this fall. Faith had attended here last year. Here's how Hope sees things. She's new in school, and the person she knows best doesn't want her nearby.
Well, we used to share classes, but she got hers switched, so we don't share classes now.
She got her switched so you guys wouldn't be in all your classes together.
She doesn't like to really hang out with me, but yeah, she got switched to her best friend's classes.
What do you think of that?
I'm used to it.
They got on when they were little, she says. Now they're teenagers. It's different. So how did she start to act?
Like, more meaner and like teenager selfish. That's why, like, okay, we get along at home, but not at school. She likes to keep her space.
Treated like that, the person can act up, try to get the other person's attention, which Hope does. It's not so effective.
I'm always mad at her.
Here's Faith, your sister.
She steals my clothes. She
she's like an instigator. When somebody's about to fight, she runs back and forth saying stuff, and she takes jokes too far. And then she like acts a fool everywhere she goes. Like she always bring attention to herself. I don't like that much attention. So, and everybody thinks of us as one. Like everything she do, they say, why y'all do that? They even think it is me. She's evil. Like I said, she has anger issues.
And
She's like the meaner one. Everybody says.
The troubles between these 13-year-old twins definitely got the attention of the 36-year-old twins over at the principal's office.
Because we kind of get offended. We got a little offended when we took it personal. It's something about twins that really, because we are twins, when we see siblings having issues and disrespecting each other in public, we take it a little bit more personal.
Reggie says that for a while, the twin girls were in their office constantly, both brothers.
They were really talking about Ronnie started twin code, how to respect each other as sisters. Because when we hear like, shut up, no, you shut up, no, you're ugly, no, you're ugly, we're like, whoa, no, that's totally against twin code. Let's talk about this. Calm down, girl.
He said that we have a gift.
This is faith.
Because not everybody gets to be a twin, and that we're breaking twin code by doing this stuff to each other. And
Wait, what's the twin code?
I don't know.
And then we talked about you come from greatness, you're queens and kings.
You just call us kings and queens, something. I wasn't really listening. I appreciate that they trying to help, but I don't like her. So they said that we like only have each other and all that, so we should stick together. I tried to do that with my sister, but she doesn't really do like that. Like I always try to give her hugs and say hi and stuff, but she doesn't like that. She just doesn't want to be my friend, so I just let it slide.
That was hope. Here's faith.
No, I just think that it's not that easy because I gotta go to school with her, and I gotta go home with her. I gotta walk home with her. I gotta see her when I wake up, when I go to sleep, and I don't like her.
Oh, that's an improvement.
Ronnie says that a few months ago, they weren't saying, I don't like her. They were saying, I hate her. He says that whatever they told me in the interviews, whatever they might think, they're doing better.
Because they're not in the office with us every day. They're in class. They're making strides in their academics. And this is coming from their teachers saying, wow.
In November, the girls even wrote them a letter, thanking them for all the time and help they've given. And for better or worse, the brothers have come to see themselves in these girls. They really want them to be closer someday. And the only question in our interview where they disagreed was, does it matter if these two girls ever get close? First, here's Ronnie.
I personally, I think it doesn't matter as long as they're happy in their individual lives. I think it matters that they remain. I think they should stay close. I think that I argue that he's breaking twin code right now. No, but I respectfully disagree. I really think it's in they're each other's pulse, and whether they believe it or not yet, I see that as they get older, they're really going to need each other.
Of course, he is the one who sees a twin in his life as his pulse. And today on our show, we have people who feel this very aggressive kind of empathy, seeing their lives in somebody else's life, seeing somebody else as their surrogate. One of our stories today is about a man who did some terrible, terrible things to apparently lots of people related to. The other story involves a scandal that shook Washington for decades, a scandal involving sex, power, cabinet positions, and here's a word I do not get to say very often, petticoats. WBEZ Chicago, it's This American Life, distributed by Public Radio International. I'm Aaron Glass. Stay with us. Step 1, petticoats and a twist. So, this is not the kind of Washington sex scandal that we're all used to. There's no presidential candidate, president, or congressman caught doing whatever. There's no mopey press conference with his wife by his side, blah, blah, blah. The sex scandal that we're going to talk about now was one of the first sex scandals of the American presidency during Andrew Jackson's time in the 1820s and 30s. And it affected the course of the entire country in surprisingly large ways. Sarah Koenig tells what happened during what's become known as the Petticoat Affair.
It all began with a pretty young innkeeper's daughter named Margaret O'Neill, or Peggy as she was called. According to accounts written at the time, Peggy O'Neill was a fox. Cherry-lipped, perfectly proportioned, white skin, thick dark curly hair, a firm, round chin.
She also had very blue eyes. That comes from other accounts.
That's Nancy Toms, who teaches American history at Stony Brook University in New York.
She had an education. She spoke French. She danced like an angel. She played the piano. She performed in front of First Lady Donna Madison with her. So clearly, she was not a Yahoo, but she was crossing class lines, and that made her suspect among the ladies of Washington. And then this unfortunate business with Justin Timberlake did not help her.
Surely his name isn't Justin Timberlake.
No. Did I just say that? Oh, that's awful. Oh, his name was John Timberlake, not Justin. That's right.
I have an eye trained for opportunities like this. Lonely sailor, a free little tavern girl, moonlit night.
That's the first time John Timberlake lays eyes on Peggy at her father's boarding house in Washington. Or at least how Hollywood imagined it in the 1946 movie called The Gorgeous Hussy.
Would you drink? Thank you. To Miss O'Neill, sir, whom I am more interested than ever.
Peggy marries John Timberlake very young. She's only 17. He's a purser in the Navy, which means he has to go away on long trips all the time, leaving his very young, flirtatious wife back at her father's boarding house, where all kinds of important men, especially politicians, stay while Congress is in session. She tends bar and does things women didn't usually do, in particular, talking politics, hanging around with the guests, while Timberlake is at sea.
And while he was away, she came under the friendship of another older man, a senator from Tennessee named John Eaton. Took a big interest in the young couple. The husband had debt problems, and he tried to help with them.
The old let me help you with your debt problems routine evidently works. Gossip starts flying that Peggy and Senator Eaton are too intimate, that they are consorting. Then Timberlake dies at sea. He cuts his own throat, in fact. Maybe because of his debts, maybe, rumors had it at the time, because of Peggy. And rather than mourning her husband for the customary year or two, Peggy, the widow Mrs. John Timberlake, becomes Mrs. John Eaton just 8 months later. This is not done. It's outrageous. There's even talk that prior to the marriage, Peggy had become pregnant and had a miscarriage, or even an abortion. The society ladies of Washington are thoroughly scandalized. Remember, women can't vote yet. They're not in politics. They're not even allowed to make public speeches. But that doesn't mean they're silent, especially these Washington wives, who are exposed to the workings of government. These ladies in Jackson's time, they controlled social life, judged who was moral and who was not. That's how they influenced their powerful husbands.
One of Peggy Eaton's biggest critics was Floride Calhoun, the wife of John C. Calhoun, the vice president. So she was the vice president's wife, from a very aristocratic South Carolina plantation aristocracy. And she was the one who first made it clear Peggy Eaton was beyond the pale. She was not going to return her call. And that was the way you conducted war among the petticoats, is someone came to pay a call on you, and then you did not return it. And that, and the etiquette that was evolving of in this era, was tantamount to a full rejection, to a full cut. And what Floride Calhoun did, the other ladies fell in line and also cut. Peggy refused to acknowledge her socially.
The job of good Christian women at this time was to improve the United States by making sure their husbands and children were model citizens, rational, virtuous. So it's not just that people disapproved of Peggy Eaton or were jealous of her. It's that she was seen as a danger to the Republic. She might lead their leaders astray.
We have been forced to take this stand for the salvation of the morals of our homes.
Again, Hollywood.
We realize that their sphere of influence is great, but we demand that she be removed from that sphere and expelled from our community.
All this was, of course, painful for Peggy Eaton, or at least it sounded really painful for Joan Crawford, who played Peggy Eaton in The Gorgeous Hussy.
I've humiliated myself. I've called knowing they were at home to be told they were not. I've ignored insults, lies, gossip. Their blue blood curdles in their veins at the very mention of the hussy.
They don't know anything about you, babe.
Enter Andrew Jackson, freshly elected President of the United States. Peggy Eaton's personal life will soon envelop his administration. Jackson was a proud, emotional frontier politician with a famous temper. He'd been orphaned by 14 or 15. Both his parents and his two older brothers had died. But he makes his way to Tennessee, becomes a successful lawyer and landowner and slaveholder, not to mention a military hero. And he manages all this without family connections. So he's fiercely loyal to his close friends and political allies, including John Eaton. So Eaton's trouble with the petticoats become Jackson's troubles with the petticoats.
Having a virtuous wife was considered part of a test of a man's character. And by that test, Eaton had failed. Now here's where it gets interesting. By supporting Eaton, Andrew Jackson gave his enemies the ammunition to question his morality.
Jackson wasn't going to stand for it. He had just been through a similar battle involving his own beloved wife, Rachel. The presidential campaign of 1828 had savaged Andrew and Rachel Jackson. Anti-Jackson campaigners, supporters of John Quincy Adams, portrayed her as a backwoods, pipe-smoking hayseed with low morals to boot. Rachel had been in an unhappy marriage prior to her marrying Andrew Jackson, but it turned out that this second marriage happened before her first one was technically dissolved, unbeknownst to the Jacksons. When they figured it out, they actually remarried. Nevertheless, the anti-Jackson party launched a smear campaign. There were lengthy pamphlets, newspaper articles, saying Rachel was a bigamist.
Oh, we know she isn't one! Your Rachel ain't fit for the White House.
So Jackson was accused of being unfit for the presidency because of his relationship, this unfortunate legal muddle with Rachel Jackson. She was so distraught over the charges that she withdrew from private life.
Give me my pipe, Kate. One little puff can't do no harm. The doctor says no, Aunt Rachel. No more pipe smoking.
This is an ailing Rachel Jackson, hunched in a rocker, wrapped in a dowdy shawl, confiding in Peggy. We don't know whether Peggy really called the soon-to-be president and first lady Aunt Rachel and Uncle Andy, as she does in the movie, but apparently the Jacksons had met her at her father's boarding house and had liked her.
Hey, these women folks around here are gonna make it awful unpleasant for you, just like they did for me. Watch out for them, honey.
She eventually had a heart attack and died soon after his election, and he always blamed the gossip for having killed his Rachel. At her funeral, he said, "May God forgive her murderers, as I know she forgave them. I never can."
Their gossip killed my Rachel, babe. Their lying, scummy tongues killed her just as sure as if they'd stabbed her with a knife.
That's Lionel Barrymore playing Andrew Jackson.
And I swear by a memory, they'll never do it again to anyone I love. Not so long as I've got one breath left in my body to stop them with.
So here's a man, he's in deep mourning. All the descriptions of him, he arrives as president in 1829, just brokenhearted. He wants to make Eaton, who's a very close friend of his, part of his cabinet, and he's told by the Washington insiders, don't do that. This Peggy Eaton affair, it will cause you all kinds of problems with the ladies of Washington and their husbands. husbands as well. And Jackson is incensed. This really strikes chords of what had happened to his own wife. He was going to defend Peggy Eaton as he had defended his wife, as he expected any Christian gentleman to defend the honor of the woman he loves. And that, among the members of the cabinet, created a division. Did you side with the Calhouns in rejecting Peggy, or did you side with the Jacksons?
The surrogacies of this thing are dizzying. Peggy is a surrogate for Rachel. Jackson is Peggy's surrogate, fighting this fight on her behalf. And the scandal itself? Jackson sees it as a proxy for his struggles with hoity-toity enemies who are trying to beat back the progress of our country, our young, perky, outspoken immigrant country. That's a lot like Miss Peggy O'Neill. Jackson, of course, does appoint Eaton his Secretary of War, and as the power couples of Washington publicly snub Peggy Eaton, now a cabinet wife, at the inauguration and at administration parties, Jackson proceeds to try to clear her reputation. He gathers testimony about her behavior, collects affidavits, argues with church leaders about it, berates his cabinet members who won't accept her innocence. He's President of the United States, and he becomes Peggy Eaton's de facto defense counsel. He becomes obsessed. But he cannot convince his administration. Except for Secretary of State Martin Van Buren, almost no one sticks up for Peggy.
By all accounts, he spent an extraordinary amount of time during his first term collecting information and haranguing people about Peggy Eaton.
Eventually, the cabinet becomes dysfunctional.
This led to the resignation, in some cases voluntary, in some cases forced, of almost the entire cabinet. They could not resolve this issue. Eaton resigned, Van Buren resigned.
I hereby ask of you and accept your resignation. Well, this is without precedent in the history of our country. Our country is without precedent, Mr. Calhoun. But by the eternal, I'm going to have justice. You understand the word? Justice. Now get.
And essentially, Jackson started over again. He did eventually replace the cabinet.
Was there any talk at the time that Jackson's obsession with this, that he was like a little off kilter, or like he was just crazy? Like, why is he jeopardizing his entire government over defense of this woman? Or did they see it as, well, you know, we've got to get our loyalty straight or we can't function as a government anyway, so this is part of the purging? I mean, it just seems crazy.
Yes, I don't think there was the same level of awareness. It's the historians who've gone back and looked at the amount of time, the number of letters that he wrote, that in retrospect, it's clear how obsessional he became about this. At the time, I think it was seen more as this is partisan politics, and that it was viewed as a faction war.
American politics was in transition, Nancy says, from a party system that was more elite-dominated to a party system where the vast majority of white men could vote, whether or not they owned property or were well-educated. Politicians who want to get elected need to do this new thing: engage the masses, engage their base. And they found, then as now, that these kinds of moral issues engaged the base.
In fact, at the time, it was seen as an issue of the elite Eastern Seaboard against the up-and-coming West. It was the common man against the aristocrats. Peggy was a woman of the people. Andrew Jackson
Try
was
not
a
to
man
burn yourself. I'm holding it on the left
to
nose.
focus on this kind of
And
trivia, this gossip, to allow the gossip of these Washington meetings to trouble the president was a sign of this elite aristocracy creeping in, and that was completely unacceptable in the new republic. It had to be rooted out. Jackson himself, he saw this as a conspiracy on the part of the Adams party to destroy him, and thus by defending Peggy Eaton, he's really defending himself.
The person he's largely defending himself against is his own vice president, John Calhoun. Remember, it's Calhoun's wife, Floride, who led the Society Women against Peggy. John Calhoun and Jackson were fighting about other things too, not just Peggy. A hugely controversial tariff, for instance, in 1828. It's a tariff on imported goods that Southerners like Calhoun see as putting the South, especially his home state of South Carolina, at a disadvantage to the benefit of Northern manufacturers. And as our personal fight over Peggy Eaton spirals out of control, as Calhoun gets increasingly angry at Jackson, he starts agitating for the right of South Carolina to protect its own interests, even to secede if necessary. Then South Carolina tries to openly defy federal law. In 1832, it declares that federal tariffs will be null and void within its borders. It's the nullification crisis. It's one of the biggest challenges of Jackson's presidency. That same year, Vice President John Calhoun quits.
Calhoun, once he resigns, he goes back to South Carolina. He's elected to the Senate, and as a senator becomes the architect of the states' rights philosophy in the South. Jackson, as a Southerner, is sympathetic to states' rights, but when push comes to shove, he sees the Union as the top priority and faces down Calhoun and the nullification controversy. I mean, it's a major rehearsal for the Civil War. They eventually reach a compromise, so South Carolina does not secede. But Abraham Lincoln took a great deal of inspiration from Andrew Jackson's position, the Union above all position that Lincoln would eventually have to adopt as well.
So Peggy Eaton saved the Union.
Yes, Peggy really gave us the red, white, and blue, and that's
And I were sitting here tonight.
That's right.
The big winner in all this, besides the Union, of course, and Joan Crawford, was a man whose name has undoubtedly been on the tip of your tongue, Martin Van Buren. He became the next vice president, and after that, the next president. Not John Calhoun, who'd been widely expected to take over. Once he resigned as vice president, Calhoun's aspirations were finished. No, it was Van Buren, the only member of Jackson's cabinet who carefully, strategically supported Peggy Eaton during the Petticoat Affair, who understood that it was in his own interest to break Washington's social protocol and pay a visit to Mrs. Eaton, to knock on her door. 30 years after the Petticoat Affair, in 1860, a journalist named James Parton published a biography of Jackson. Chapter 23 was titled, Mr. Van Buren Calls on Mrs. Eaton. Parton wrote, quote, "The political history of the United States, for the last 30 years, dates from the moment when the soft hand of Mr. Van Buren touched Mrs. Eaton's knocker."
Sarah Koenig, I don't know what you just think you heard right there, but she's one of the producers of our show.
If her eyes are blue as sky, that's Peggy O'Neill.
Coming up, a teenager tries to understand why her dad wants to adopt a 27-year-old ex-con into the family. That's a minute from Chicago Public Radio and Public Radio International when our program continues.
This episode of This American Life is brought to you by Squarespace. If you have
Ta-da.
a story to tell, whether it's about starting a new business or sharing photos from a recent adventure, Squarespace gives you everything you need to bring these stories to life online. With modern techniques, simple drag-and-drop tools, and 24-hour support, you can create a professional website, blog, or portfolio in just a few minutes.
Okay,
For a free trial,
is long.
visit squarespace.com/American. This is American Life. I'm Ira Glass. Each week on our program, of course, we choose a theme, bringing you different kinds of stories on that theme. Today's program, surrogates,
people, standing in for other people, substituting in all kinds of situations.
Remember
We
polarity?
arrived at two of our programs.
Positive longer.
Wall in the family. This is a story where a bunch of people, including the father of the person who's going to be telling the story, see themselves in somebody who did some truly, truly awful things. A warning if you're listening with kids or have sensitivity to some things. This story has some violence in it. On the positive side, there's also a brief period to Neil Patrick Harris. Amity Bitzel tells the story.
When I was 16, my parents adopted a 27-year-old man. Not long after he moved in, NBC broadcast a made-for-TV movie based on his life called Sudden Fury, A Family Torn Apart. It was about his life before we adopted him. My entire family gathered in our living room to watch. Neil Patrick Harris played the character based on my new brother. It opens with him, a teenager in a big suburban house, making a phone call.
Annapolis Police. Hello? I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
I think my parents are dead.
When the police arrive at the house, it's a gruesome scene. His father is in the basement, covered with blood, stabbed to death. His mother's outside, in her pajamas, lying face down in the yard. She's been both stabbed and bludgeoned. In the movie, they call my adopted brother Brian, though his name was really Larry Swartz. And in the film, as he becomes a main suspect, his lawyers confront him.
Listen, Brian, we have a little problem. The police don't believe your story. They think you're lying. Like how you got blood on your shoes and why you didn't hear anything on the night of the murder. How do you explain that?
I can't. Yes, you can. Yes, you can. I can't. Tell me what.
Stop hurting. Stop hurting.
My sister and I sat on the floor as the film played. Larry, the real person, my new brother, who killed his parents, sat next to my mom and dad, his new mom and dad, on the couch. Everyone acted calm. The movie did a pretty good job of portraying what actually happened. A warning, this next half minute or so of my story gets graphic. He'd repeatedly stabbed his father and his mother with a kitchen knife, and bludgeoned his mother with a maul, one of those big wood-chopping things that looks like an axe. The movie doesn't include this, but when the police found Larry's mother's body, she was naked. Larry's lawyer told a reporter that Larry admitted to sexually violating her. When the end credits rolled, we agreed the movie seemed over the top, almost corny, in that primetime TV way. I remember somebody